Most of you guys know me, but for those of you who don't, my name is Slade Robertson. I am a senior Bachelor of Arts music major here studying guitar with a minor in Japanese. This is my senior project. I appreciate all the support. Thank you again for coming. The music of Japan and analysis through a historical lens. In this project, I've done a lot of research into not only Japan's music history, but general history as well. And this project incorporates both into its description as a survey of Japanese music history from 13,000 BC to the modern day. This project combines two topics that I enjoy studying very much, those being music and Japanese, into a fun and informative format that I hope everybody can walk away from learning something new. So, let's go ahead and get started. So, before we can fully delve into the nitty-gritty, we need to first set up a couple of terms and define some eras of Japanese history. Japanese history is divided into 5 distinct eras, which are then further subdivided into different periods. We have ancient Japan from 13,000 BC to 538 AD. This period of Japanese history is, the defining factor is that it was largely hunting and gathering. There wasn't really an agricultural system set up yet until we get to around the end of the Kofun period. So the Jomon period, 13,000 BCE to 1000 BCE, the Yayoi period, where we see settlers from mainland China arrive in Japan, and the Kofun period, where we start to set up a little bit more agriculture. Classical Japan, 538 AD to 1185. is made up of the Asuka, Nara, and Heian periods. The Asuka and Nara periods are where we start to see farming set up more, be more effective and reliable. In the Heian period, we see a little bit of political turmoil, which we'll get into in a little bit, that leads into feudal Japan from 1185 to 1603. Feudal Japan, as the name implies, was under a system of heavy feudalism for that for just over 4 centuries there. The Kamakura period is where that really got into full swing. The Muromachi and Azuchi Momoyama period make up the rest of that historical era. Into early modern Japan, 1603 to 1868. That is only one period. We'll get into why that's important a little bit later on. The Edo period is where the feudalism kind of stops a bit, but there's still a lot of division of land. And then modern Japan, 1868 to the current day, is made up of the Meiji period from 1868 to 1912, the Taisho period from 1912 to 1926, the Showa period from 1926 to 1989, the Heisei period from 1989 to 2019, and then the Reiwa period, which began just 5 years ago, which we are still currently in. The music of ancient Japan is fairly simple, generally, as most music of this time period was around the world. Music was used largely as a way to bolster a sense of community and to tell stories, nothing extremely complex necessarily, but like a lot of other early civilizations, they developed percussion instruments first because it's easy to make a beat with whatever you've got and then put something to that. Followed afterwards by woodwinds and then simple stringed instruments. Woodwinds likely because of the overwhelming presence of bamboo. Flutes were very easy to produce with the tools that they had. Following the arrival of Chinese settlers from mainland China in the Yayoi period, music begins to incorporate themes of nature and Buddhist tradition, just sort of the culture that they brought over as well. We see a little bit of that culture as well in the form of metallurgy, where music or instruments move from being just natural and organic materials into bronze and iron, sometimes copper as well. Not much is known about those instruments of the Jomon period. We don't really have many that survive given just the material that they were made out of. But there's a large amount of clay pottery that still exists that dates back to that time period. The one such example of that metallurgical practice that I was talking about in the form of a musical instrument comes in the form of doltaku bells, which are these handheld bells about this tall, usually made of bronze or copper that they would use for Buddhist rituals. And then evidence of simple woodwind and string instruments such as the zither exists in the form of clay Honeywell sculptures. The zither, for those that are uninformed, is what this little guy on the right is holding. A zither is a long piece of wood with several strings tied on either end to different pegs that you can tighten or loosen to adjust the tuning of. The zither originally began with just 5 strings and has seen evolution over the course of Japanese and Chinese history, a lot of modifications made to it, to now the modern day koto, an example of a more modern zither having 13 strings, a lot of pitch bending capability, easily changeable tuning. And then on the left there we see one of those doltaku bells that is used in a lot of those Buddhist traditions, those handheld bells. We can see it's fairly old, likely bronze or copper, given that it's oxidized so much, a lot of that green tint on there. As we move out of ancient Japan and into classical Japan, the Asuka and Nara periods usually are lumped together. The only major change being the reason being the only major change is just the leadership of that time, switching from one governance to the next. There was a larger level of organization in Japanese society. As I mentioned earlier, we saw an increase in capability of agriculture and farming. The largest crop, of course, being rice, just a mainstay of Japanese food even now. Not just a dietary staple, but a cultural one. Rice, and it's where we see rice begin to start to be used as a form of currency in this time. It led to sort of a system where the wealthiest people were farmers, because owning that much land means that you can produce that much rice, and then producing that much rice means that you can produce the most money in your possession. Music took on a different kind of purpose. It was still bolstering a sense of community, but the things they sang about kind of changed a bit. Rather than just the simple hunting and gathering stories or creation myths, instead they were singing for celebration. It was one such example is Dengaku, which was a ceremony used to celebrate the planting of a new rice crop for the new season. We see a couple of genres come into popularity during this time. Null dramas were sort of an incorporation of a lot of different elements, a bit of a stage play where it incorporated music and dance and storytelling. And then we see Gagaku sort of incorporating the same kinds of elements but more of the Buddhist tradition into it. Gagaku literally just means court music in Japanese. It became popular amongst high society and continued to be that way for many different periods, which we'll look at a little bit later on. Towards the end of the classical period, as we get more into towards the end of the classical era, into the Heian period, civilization and government become just more effective and widespread. As most of us know, Japan's not a big landmass. Once you expand out to cover most of it, different systems kind of have to take place. Though Japan did have an emperor, a lot of the nation's military control was held by the shogun, which is it's a term that we use quite a bit, but I don't think a lot of people in the Western mindset really know what it means. A shogun is essentially just a military leader. You can think of it as kind of a not quite a warlord, that may be the wrong term, but just somebody who's in control of most of the military power. Land became increasingly divided, just getting smaller and smaller divisions, and the shogun at the time, Minamoto Yoritomo, appointed a new ruling class, those being the daimyo. You can sort of think of an English earl or lord or duke even, that would hold control over divisions of territory handed out to these daimyo by the shogun. Many daimyo would then hire samurai, which is another term that I think we throw around quite a bit. Maybe we don't quite know the definition. It's essentially just a mercenary that was hired to protect land or to advance forward onto other plots of land, both a shield to protect with and a spear to push forward with into different daimyo's territory in order to take it. It was as the title of the slide implies, feudalism is beginning to take hold, rising to full swing. During this period of time, tension's running high. It's less about we have the food to sustain us, let's focus on the arts. It's more, this is a survival kind of thing. We don't really have as much ability now to focus on fine arts as we would like, unfortunately. So music of the time didn't really change very, very much due to that. Towards the end of that feudalist era, I know I'm breezing past it just a little bit, but the Kamakura Muromachi periods make up that beginning, but then towards the end of it, in the Azuchi Momoyama period, we see Oda Nobunaga, this man on the right, very handsome guy. He was the daimyo of Owari province. He waged war against some of the other daimyo of the rest of the region, along with a couple of his more trusted daimyo from neighboring territories. Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu were his two most trusted other daimyo that he led this charge with. With assistance from these other daimyo, he attempted to unify the territories of Japan under one ruler, though he was killed before that unification was fully realized. He was succeeded by his two more trusted daimyo, first by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and then following his death in 1598, by Tokugawa Ieyasu, who ascended to the rank of shogun in 1603, which, if we remember our beginning slides with all of our different historical periods, marks the start of the Edo period, which we will get to in a second. The music of feudal Japan doesn't change all that much, as I mentioned earlier, but there is one major development that changes a lot going forward, and that is the introduction of this instrument, the shamisen. The purpose of music itself largely remained the same, but the shamisen kind of shook up how it sounded. This instrument, the shamisen, it's my personal favorite Japanese instrument. I love it. The sound of it is great. I got a video to show you here in a minute. But the shamisen, just to analyze it a bit, to break it down historically and how it operates. It originally began as a Chinese instrument called the sangjan, which was, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, I don't speak Chinese. It's called the sangjan, which was a similar body shape. Instead of being that square body shape, it was more round. Originally, the face of the sangjan's body was made with snakeskin. And as Japan kind of adapted it to fit their own sensibilities and the types of sounds they like to hear, we saw a change in material from snakeskin to dog or cat skin, and then the wood to being Japanese maple. Strings remained gut throughout the time, but these three shamisen on the right, these are not identical. Not just the types of, the colors on different parts of the shamisen they chose to use. These are three different models of shamisen, even though they look fairly similar. The one on the left is the thinnest, the one on the right is the thickest. Mostly, when I say thinnest and thickest, I refer to thickness of the neck and length of the neck as well. The one on the left being the holsolzao, that being the thinnest, then the chuzao in the middle, and then the futolzao on the right being the thickest neck. The thickness of the neck and the length of the neck lends itself to an ability to produce a higher range of tones, and for those tones to resonate longer and louder, which we will see a bit of in this video that I prepared. These are shamisen girls Ki and Ki. They're from Tokyo originally. Very famous shamisen players from Tokyo. They've won several major awards, national shamisen playing competitions across Japan in the last 10 years. The style of shamisen that we're going to see them play is a style called Tsugaru Shamisen, which is denoted by its quick pace. It's usually always a duet, sometimes a trio. It's a quick pace and very kind of all over the place rhythms, and it's a style of shamisen playing that I really enjoy as a string player myself. So why don't we dive in? talk a little bit about the technique on display there, just as a string player myself, I find it so fascinating. I just enjoy listening to this type of music, so just please allow me to indulge for a second. Talking about the right and left hand technique, I mean, not only is the synchronization perfect, but to talk about the right hand technique, to compare this to just, to compare this to guitar, my more comfortable instrument. Normally on guitar, if you're playing anything classical or using any sort of finger style music, you're using all 5 fingers. And if you're playing anything else, generally you're using a pick and held in just your index finger and thumb. But with this instrument, we see a different kind of plectrum used. Instead, it is what we call a bachi, which is it's that sort of that longer sort of paddle-shaped instrument they're holding there. Rather than just with 2 fingers, you hold a bachi with your whole hand, where your pinky kind of wraps around the end of it, and then your thumb is on that part that you pick with. And as opposed to like with a pick, you would just hold your wrist. With a bachi, you get your whole forearm to get more torque, to get more volume out. That allows for it to resonate longer and have like more of that, I guess for lack of a better word, twang to it. And then with your left hand technique here, as a guitar player myself, I'm using all 4 fingers all the time. But if you notice in this video, they're both only using their index finger and their ring finger in their left hand. Reason being is because despite how loud this instrument can get, it doesn't carry on for forever. So you're going to need it to resonate for as long as it can. Especially when you're doing a lot of the pitch bending and vibrato, those 2 fingers are going to be on your hand. Those 2 fingers are going to be the strongest, other than your middle finger, which kind of acts as like an axis for your hand to rotate around. Those 2 fingers they provide the most power when doing like sort of those hammer on and pull off techniques. I just think this is really cool, and I'm glad to get to share it with people. So thank you for watching the whole video. Not that you had a choice. Early modern Japan, moving into the Edo period. This is the single longest period since the beginning of classical Japan in the Asuka period. This period lasts for 265 years. Whereas before, the shogun was just sort of the person who held that position of power until they died or somebody were to kill them and succeed them. Now the shogunate is under the control of one family, the Tokugawa family. Starting with Tokugawa Ieyasu at the end of the feudalist era, which we talked about a little bit ago. There were 15 different Tokugawa shogun, starting with Tokugawa Ieyasu and ending with Tokugawa Yoshinobu in 1868. There were a lot of changes made to Japan's socio-political landscape under the Tokugawa shogunate. The 3 largest being that measures were put into place to ensure that other daimyo couldn't muster enough power to challenge the shogun or other daimyo, really. There was a limit on the amount of an army of samurai that they could have at one time, as well as a requirement of governmental approval before they could make any sort of new fortifications or repair older fortifications on their land. Second, and this is arguably the most impactful of these 3 changes, Japan cut off nearly all contact with Western foreign powers. There was one country that in Europe, one group of people that they still traded with at one time per year around Christmas time. Anybody want to guess? France? Not France. It was the Dutch. Weirdly enough, once per year around Christmas, the port of Okinawa, the Dutch could come in and trade with Japan. There were still limited trade agreements with China and Korea, but none of the Western world. The thing that makes the Edo period so important to the evolution of Japanese history is this isolation, because if we compare this to European composers of the time that were they were in a place where all these other countries and cultures and groups of people are connected by land. It's easy enough to move from one to the next. You could be born in Austria, study in France and Spain, and then compose in England and all these other. It's fairly easy to do, comparatively speaking, but Japan is entirely an island nation. In isolating themselves, it cuts them off from the rest of that outside world and allows musical evolution to happen in a vacuum, which we don't see in really any sort of modern history other than Japan, especially not for this long. 265 years is a very long time to develop your own sensibilities for music, and it's just such a unique situation to get to observe from the outside now, all this time later. Third, and this is arguably the other one that is arguably the most important. A rigid social hierarchy was put into place that limited nearly everything. It affected everything, every aspect of modern life for the majority of people. There were limitations placed on the clothes that you could wear or make or buy, the land that you could own, the buildings that you could build on the land, what you could do with the land that you owned, the food that you could make or grow. And more importantly for this presentation, it was a limit placed on the types of music that you could compose, that you could listen to, the type of instruments that you could use to compose that music or perform that music. Very, very limiting. Garaku and zokugaku are the two terms that are used to define what is higher class music and what is lower class music. Garaku, as we discussed earlier, means court music. It is for that upper class higher court. And then zokugaku is for the lower court, whereas the gaku and zokugaku just means music, but the zoku means vulgar. It is literally music that is for that lower class of people is what it was defined as. Music wasn't analyzed anymore for how enjoyable it is to listen to. It's not about any sonic elements anymore during this time. Music was analyzed for its political and social value. Does this continue to maintain the values and ideals that we hold most important? Rather than, do I like this? Is this cool to listen to? Is it pleasing to my ears? Instruments as well, as I mentioned earlier, were separated into being of higher and lower classes. A lot of traditional instruments used in Buddhist chant and gagaku performances, like the taiko and otsuzumi, kotsuzumi, things that we'll talk about a little bit later in a different context, were seen as higher class instruments. Things that could create generally lower pitches were seen as higher class instruments and quieter pitches some of the time. And then woodwinds and stringed instruments like the shakuhachi flute and the shamisen, like we discussed earlier, were seen as lower class instruments. And despite that class divide, positive things still came out of it. Likely due to the decreased amount of internal conflict that we see coming out of feudal Japan, music had time to flourish again. We see a lot of compositions in the zokugaku sort of broad genre, as well as a few in the gagaku genre. Kabuki is one of those elements that has come out of zokugaku that continues to be a mainstay of modern Japanese art. It's a well-respected traditional art form in modern Japan. It is a form of theater that kind of evolved out of those no-dramas like we talked about earlier. It began during the mid-Edo period. It was originally a street-level performance that started in Shimane Prefecture. Kabuki has undergone many changes throughout its lifetime. It started, like I said, as a street-level performance and changed and grew to be performed in large event halls. Originally, it was only a form of dance, but other elements began to be incorporated into its storytelling, costumes and instruments and dance moves. And most notably, of all these instruments that were incorporated is the shamisen. Part of the reason why I enjoy it so much. Kabuki, in its earliest form, was created, as I mentioned, in Shimane Prefecture by a shrine maiden of the Izumo Taisha Shrine in Okuni. It was originally a street-level performance that started to grow in popularity. The popularity spread to other prefectures that surrounded Shimane Prefecture. And other women began to mimic this style of performance, creating a genre of kabuki called onna kabuki. Onna just means woman in Japanese. They began to incorporate the shamisen more and more into these performances. Another a subgenre of kabuki called wakushu kabuki, meaning young men's kabuki, started to become popular as well. It incorporated more comedic elements and acrobatic movements, and then eventually these two types of kabuki were outlawed by the shogunate, unfortunately for being too provocative, too quote-unquote morally corruptive. Fights would break out in the streets where these things were being performed, likely because of just the allure of the performers themselves. After these two types of kabuki were banned, the performers still wanted to perform. It was just something that they genuinely enjoyed, and so that led to the creation of Yaro kabuki, which is men's kabuki, which remained the way that kabuki was performed for a long time, being only an all-male cast. It's since changed a little bit. Yaro kabuki started to tell these complex, longer-form stories and incorporated a full ensemble into their performances called a hayashi, which was comprised of one or more shamisen, shakuhachi flute, otsuzumi, kotsuzumi, and taiko drums, and then vocalists. Usually your vocalists were just your non-wind players. But the size of the ensemble allowed for a continuous musical accompaniment to the entire performance, which Those street level performances were 10 to 15 minutes. Eventually, after the incorporation of the hayashi, they grew to be 30 minutes or an hour or two, up to 5, 6 hours sometimes, even still. They began to lengthen, and so the genre of music, the name of the genre of music, changed from kouta, meaning short song, to the nagauta, which means long song. A couple of instruments of the hayashi. On the left and right, we have a couple of percussion instruments. On the left there, we have the otsuzumi and kotsuzumi, the kotsuzumi being the smaller one on the right. The otsuzumi and kotsuzumi are like little hand drums that just kind of have like a quick poppy kind of sound to them. And then the taiko on the right is this larger drum that stands about this tall. You play with these longer, thicker sticks. It produces a deeper, more resonant sound. And then in the middle there, we have several examples of the shinobue, which is a type of flute, as we can see in the picture. Shinobue come in all different sizes, different tunings. If you've seen many movies set in Japan of this time period, you've absolutely heard a shinobue. If not a shinobue, then a shakuhachi or a ryuteki. These instruments were just very iconic of that kind of sound. But a bit about the relationship between nagauta and the shamisen. The shamisen, likely due to the impact of kabuki, has become arguably the most iconic Japanese instrument. It played such a pivotal role in the hayashi because it was just such a distinct tone quality and range. That tenor range really stood out amongst the sort of soprano voicing of the flutes and then the lower percussion, the taiko. It just had such a distinct tone quality, as we saw in the video. It really just stands out. It also acts as an emotional barometer in a lot of scenes of kabuki productions, where it will define how we interpret the scene. You'll see performers in videos of kabuki performances changing tunings mid-performance while the rest of the band still plays on. But a couple of examples of these tunings that are often used, we have the Honjoshi tuning, B3, E4, and B4, which is used for stronger, more dignified characters. The Niyagari tuning, which is B3, F sharp 4, and B4, which is used for more jovial characters and moments of levity. And then the Sansagaru tuning, B3, E4, and A4, are used for more melancholy or tranquil scenes. During the Edo period, we don't see many changes to the approach to composition. It's largely just a change to instrumentation, as we talked about with the shamisen and how popular it became. The composition of the Edo period is largely centered around 5 different pentatonic scales. For those that haven't taken any theory classes, pentatonic, if we break that down, penta, 5 tonic tones. Scales made up of 5 tones. The Hira, Joshi, Iwato, Yo, and Insin scales, which are rooted in folk songs passed down from the ancient and classical eras of Japan, which we'll get into in just a second. Aside from music written for kabuki, a lot of the Edo period's music was shorter, just more easily absorbable, something that you can sit down and listen to and move on to something else. We saw, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of composition for zokugaku, the quote-unquote lower class music, and a lot of it was for the shamisen. To discuss a bit about these scales, these are all, I've got these all starting on C just for ease of analysis and consistency. But starting at the top left and then moving right and down, starting with the Hirajoshi scale, we have the tones C, D, E flat, G, and A flat. As I mentioned before, these scales are all pentatonic. C, D, E flat, G, and A flat, which to approach looking at this scale from a Western music theory perspective, it lends itself pretty well generally to just a standard minor scale. It just leaves out the 4 and the 7, rather than being C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, and B flat. We leave out the F and the B flat to just sort of incorporate kind of a pentatonic Aeolian idea without the standard pentatonic Aeolian mode or pentatonic minor mode. To us, generally would be C, E flat, F, G, and B flat. But here we get to include the D and A flat. Moving on to the Iwato scale, we see C, D flat, F, G flat, and B flat, which again, looking at it from a Western theoretical perspective, is somewhat a pentatonic version of a C Locrian scale, or a D flat major scale starting on C. Again, just leaving out 2 because again, it is pentatonic. And then on the O scale, we can see as well, it's kind of a pentatonic version of the C major scale, or the C Ionian mode. C, D, F, G, and A, leaving out the E and B, of course. For the In scale, we see C, D, E flat, G, and B flat. The argument could be made that this lends itself well to Aeolian mode as well. However, I think because of the exclusion specifically of the flat six, I think it is equally, we can treat this equally as a sort of Dorian mode idea. We don't know whether that six is flat or not, and so we can sort of approach it from either angle. And I think given the music that is readily available of songs using that yin scale versus the Hirajoshi scale, I personally believe it lends itself better to a Dorian mode kind of idea rather than the Hirajoshi scale, given tonically or sonically what all surrounds the yin scale in a lot of works. And then the instant scale, if we're just following the sequence, the instant scale C, D flat, F, G, and B flat can essentially be looked at as a pentatonic version of a C Phrygian scale or an A flat scale starting on C, where it's, I personally, as just a music theorist and somebody that enjoys breaking stuff down like this, I just think it's interesting. We have, I mean, we're missing two modes. Granted, we don't have any Lydian or Mixolydian here, but we have our Aeolian, Locrian, Ionian, Dorian, and Phrygian mode all present here. That a lot of these songs, folk songs or otherwise, have been composed from for essentially now for at this point well over 1,000 years, just sort of having become the staple of this time period. Beginnings of the Meiji period, as we shift from early modern Japan into modern Japan. The Meiji period started in 1868 after the final years of the Edo period brought about some major changes. Excuse me. We see some major changes coming out of the Edo period. Under threat of violence from the United States Navy under Commodore Matthew Perry, not the one from Friends. It's way too long ago in the past for that to be the one from Friends. I know what you're thinking. Under threat of violence from the Navy to establish a trade relationship, Japan was forced to open its borders. Japan's the final Edo period shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu signed the Treaty of Kanagawa on March 31st, 1854. So we just missed the 170th anniversary. Set your calendar for next year. Under this treaty, Japan became obliged to offer support and protection to stranded naval officers. And open up refueling ports in Shimoda and Hakodate to just provide that support to the United States Navy. After the signing of this treaty, Yoshinobu stepped down from his position as shogun. This was a wildly unpopular decision, though it was a necessary one. Following his resignation, power was restored from the shogun to the emperor, as we see Emperor Meiji take power, after which this period of history is named. This is Emperor Meiji on the right. I'm a big fan of his mustache. I wish I had it. I don't. As the first ruler of Japan since its re-entry into the modern world, he focused on making Japan more up to date with the way that the rest of the world had become. From an industrial standpoint, just from a social standpoint as well. Meiji completely abolished the daimyo system after he gained power, hoping to create like this sense of equality among people, regardless of social status or how much land you owned. It was just more that we are all one people under the same flag, and we should be unified in that. Meiji sought widespread reform to Japan's military and education and economic systems, hoping to make the country more industrialized and modern, and a little bit more westernized in general. Meiji would then send scholars from Japan to Europe and receive European scholars that were specialized in Western language, science, and fine arts, just to get more up to speed with what the rest of the world had been doing for the last 265 years. We see a bit more change finally in the Meiji period to just Japan's approach to composition. The changes that were made were at first negatively received, but then after a while getting used to it, people began to enjoy these changes more. They were seen as fashionable and modern. A lot of citizens felt that music of the past didn't really reflect the ideals that they held anymore. And so the way that they approached music needed to be a little bit more up to date. People began to favor that sort of Western approach to music. People would listen to and compose music for wind ensembles and concert bands and orchestras and choirs. As they implemented a Western approach to theory and to notation, they would begin using heptatonic major and minor scales and key and time signature notation, Western staves, and Western instrumentation as well. Japan began to build its own pianos and other Western instruments. The first piano was brought into Japan in the early 1870s. Not too long after that, the Treaty of Kanagawa was signed by German botanist Philip Franz Balthasar von Siebold. And with that first piano, they then reverse engineered making their own pianos and other various Western instruments. The Japanese government soon after founded the Music Study Committee, which was dedicated to studying music from other places and other cultures, and then promoting music education to the youth of Japan, specifically Western notation, being able to read that from a very early age. The works of Chopin and Wagner also became very popular in this time, post-mortem for both of these composers. We have over 100 concert programs from this period of Japanese history from Japanese concert halls. And the most popular piece, Western or otherwise, was Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu in C-sharp major. It really took hold very quickly, very effectively. Following Emperor Meiji's death in 1912, the Meiji period came to an end as we see the Taisho period start. The increased focus on Westernization that Meiji started, though, continued into the 20th century and 21st century. In these forthcoming periods, the Taisho, Showa, Heisei, and Reiwa periods continued to focus on keeping pace with the rest of the world from not only an industrial perspective, but a social and technological one as well. And after Japan's surrender in the Second World War, the United States government forced several changes to Japan's government, essentially rewrote its constitution to more heavily reflect the U.S.'s constitution, more democratic process and things like that. It altered the role of the Japanese imperial family for the rights for women, and placed control of Japan's military more firmly into the hands of its people rather than only its government. Tensions were obviously high following World War II. I'm not going to get into why. Understandably high following World War II, and Western music for a lot of the older generation was not really accepted that quickly. It was rejected for a good while, but as the younger generation started to age up a bit and pay more attention to all the different genres that they had access to, music began to diversify quite a bit. More Western sensibilities started to take hold in this time. As a result of all these different genres being incorporated into just the everyday life for a lot of younger Japanese citizens, especially, a sense of urgency was created that hopes to preserve a lot of traditional Japanese music. The Tokyo University of Fine Arts and Music was founded in 1949, which was one of the biggest steps forward, as well as a lot of preservation societies, which popped up around the same time, that were dedicated to each one to a different genre and preserving its value and a lot of the works created for it. So you would have one for Gagaku and one for Nagauta, and then just as many genres as they could. And in the modern day, over the last few decades, Japan, like the rest of the world, mostly largely because of the advent of the internet, has experienced a widespread free exchange of musical ideas and information. There is a large level of popularity of Japanese music in foreign markets. Again, due to the internet largely, but again, just due to more readily available forms of Japanese entertainment. I can't tell you how many Final Fantasy songs and different anime theme songs are on various playlists that I have. But they're all over the place, and they're very enjoyable. The first Japanese song actually to place on the U.S. Billboard charts was Sakamoto Kyu's Ue o Muite Aruko in 1963. It debuted in Japan in 1961 and then took it 2 years to get to the United States, but it did peak at #1 on the U.S. Billboard charts. It's the first Japanese song ever to do that. When that song was brought over to the U.S., a couple years after its release in Japan, the title was changed from Ue o Muite Aruko in order to make it more, and this is a quote that I found that still surprises me. I get why, but in order to make it more quote-unquote approachably Japanese, that's an insane sentence that I said. It's a great song, absolutely check it out, but they changed the title from Ue o Muite Aruko to Sukiyaki. I don't know how many of you enjoy Japanese food, but sukiyaki is it's a hot pot beef dish that the song does not mention. There is no mention of beef anywhere in the song, regardless of the title. None at all. No mention of food, period, much less sukiyaki. But the lyrics of the song, to look at them, are very, it's kind of a happy, more upbeat sounding song, but to look at the lyrics, they're very sad. The song opens with 上を向いて歩こう涙がこぼれないように which is I look up while I walk so that the tears won't fall down and then 泣きながら歩く一人ぼっちの夜 which is I cry as I walk and tonight I am lonely and as we move into the bridges of the song, it's the same melody for both bridges but different lyrics. The first bridge being 幸せは空の上に幸せは雲の上に which is happiness sits above the clouds and beyond the sky. And then the second bridge being 悲しみは月の影に悲しみは星の影に which is sadness sits in the shadow of the moon and of the stars. And so it paints this picture of this guy who's looking up as he walks so the tears won't fall, staring at where he assumes happiness to sit, knowing that he's down here in all this sadness that he can't escape. And for some reason the American market went, sukiyaki, let's call it that. Why are you guys crying? It was a bit of a strange call, I think. I understand the history behind why, but a bit strange. In the 21st century, Japanese musicians have continued to employ a lot of Western music practice. Melodies of rock and roll and jazz and pop music have become pretty much just the standard anymore. A lot of modern Japanese artists, Yonezu Kenshi, Utada Hikaru, baby metal, yoasobi, just incorporating a lot of these ideas and having an easier time than ever because of the internet spreading their art just as far over the world as it will go. Japanese music technology has also continued to progress as well. Companies like Yamaha continuing to produce new models of electronic keyboards and drums and brass instruments as well. Not electronic brass, but you know what I mean. Yamaha specifically has also collaborated with a lot of Spanish musicians to create Vocaloid technology, which is fascinating to me. Vocaloid technology, if you don't know, is essentially it's a computer program that is made up of a bunch of individual syllables that they can then run through a voice processor and then assign different tones to then make whole songs completely artificially, with a completely artificial voice. The most popular and household name of those different voices being Hatsune Miku. But Japanese music in the modern day, and this is just my opinion, but I think it's got a brighter future ahead of it than ever before. I mean, music in general, I think, continues to become better and better from all over the world, not just specifically Japan, but I think due to the interconnectivity of the world, music is in a better position than it's ever been, and I think that's a very positive thing. This is the end of the program. I just have a few thank yous to give out before I let you guys all go home. First of all, I have a few faculty members that I want to thank. First of all, Dr. John Ulrich, thank you so much, just for everything. I really enjoy. I really enjoy just all your classes, and I appreciate just somebody who is there whenever we need somebody. Dr. Kurt Gorman, who couldn't be here, just somebody that I appreciate so much for just all that jazz has done for me. It's just, I don't know, jazz is something that I kind of wrote off before I got here, and I shouldn't have done it, because it's a great art form that I appreciate so much. Dr. Robert Mancusi, just for being somebody that I always enjoy talking to, and for coming to every live performance in town that he can make it to. You as well, Dr. Ulrich, thank you. Dr. Elaine Harris, the best advisor I've had since I've gotten here. Thank you so much. I wouldn't be giving this today without you to help me for all the challenges that have come with attempting to graduate. But just thank you for whenever I need anything figured out. Thank you for helping me do that. Dr. Jeffrey Bibby, the Dean of Humanities and Fine Arts, just a great guy that I appreciate so much that he comes to every event that we have, as many as he can. He couldn't be at this one tonight, but I know he was trying to be. He comes into where I work every morning and gets a medium hot chocolate with non-fat milk, and it's always nice to see him. My Japanese teacher, Kyoko Hammond, just thank you for everything. I wouldn't have as many opportunities as I do without your classes, and that means a lot. Micah Barnes, and Weston Nichols as well. Thank you so much for just putting on everything the department has that we have to do. It means a lot to all of us, not just me. Micah specifically, just thank you for working with me anytime I need anything. It's fantastic. You're great. Thank you. Matt Adams, last but certainly not least, just for being just an excellent guitar teacher that I am so happy to have learned from. On to friends. For just a quick thank you to all my friends in Lindell Street, even the ones that aren't here. Alex, David, Grant, Creed, Thomas, Denver, Aaron, Ricky, Casey, Hannah, Clayton, and Carlin. Thank you all so much. For all of the performances. I told myself I wasn't going to cry when I watched Ellis, but here I am. And then to all of my D&D friends, I would not have been able to maintain my sanity for the last 4 years if we hadn't gotten to be able to play every Sunday. Thank you so much. Excuse me. Jacob, Clayton, Aaron, Ricky, Matthew, Alex, Marcus, and Emily. I love you guys so much. Thank you. And then my family, I could do this later, but thanks. I know that you've always been proud of me my whole life, but now I've done a lot of things here that I'm proud of myself for. So, thank you. Do we have any questions?
Did you have this interest in Japanese culture before you came here, or did it?
Absolutely. I've been into Japanese media for a very long time. Not just anime and video games and music, but books as well. And it's a very fascinating culture that I'm glad to have been able to study. But I studied Japanese a little bit before I got here, just online with the resources that I had available. And then thanks to Kyoko Sensei's classes, I was able to progress a lot further. And I'm going to Japan for travel study for a month this summer, which I'm very excited about. Anything else, anybody? No? All right. Go home.